a person who's full of himself, a person who proudly calls himself as a salaried entrepreneur, a renowned leader in the pharma space. So one word that defines great leadership has been
clarity. Empathy is a very rigorous leadership skill.
looking at healthcare and double tapping on that. What makes this industry unique from a leadership standpoint as compared to some of the other industries?
So, if I have to say, healthcare is a combination of science, compassion, regulations, and commerce.
Talented people often confuse tasks and impact.
Humility is also by being a continuous learner.
But all the good things that you would do here would actually positively transform people's lives. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again. I have a very, very exciting guest on our show today. Somebody who hails from a small town in Punjab, a person who's full of himself, a person who proudly calls himself as a salaried entrepreneur, a renowned leader in the pharma space, and a very good friend of mine, Mr. Divesh Singla. Divesh, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Sunny, for having me here. Hello to your viewers as well.
Pleasure is all mine, Divesh. Thank you so much for taking your time out of a busy schedule, traveling all the way to Hyderabad and being a part of this show.
Pleasure
Means
is
a
all
lot
mine.
to me.
Thank you.
Divesh, as we speak through this course of this episode, I want to extract maximum value from you and your journey in healthcare and pharma and life sciences,
Sure.
so that our viewers can have a lot of information, can have a lot of inspiration, and can learn a lot of things from your perspective through your journey. So that's the objective of why we are talking today. But before we get there, Divesh, before you became the Divesh Singla, the industry icon that everybody is so proud of, what was your early life looking like? Where did you start, and how did you end up being in the pharma industry? Can you tell us more about it?
Absolutely. I mean, I come from a very small town, as you mentioned earlier, called as Batinda in Punjab, and grew up in a family of, engineers, which was my father, and teacher, which was my daughter, my mother, sorry. And I think the initial part of my life taught me the value of humility. And that's something which I have always been taught to carry through. Uh, I wanted to be a doctor when I was growing up. That didn't work out. And at that point in time, someone advised me, why don't you look out for a good course in the pharmaceutical sciences? Pharmacy was how it was called. And trust me, at that point in time, I would have spelled pharmacy with a F, not with a PH. That was the level of understanding that I had. However, for my good stars, I ended up in a good institution wherein there was a great exposure that I got, not only from my teachers and from the institution, but also from a lot of my seniors out there on what pharmaceutical sciences is all about. Thereafter, went on to join 𝗵𝗱 in Mohali to pursue my MBA. And I think that's where the perspective around pharmaceutical sciences changed.
Sure.
Up until then, it was more like an alternative path. Hey, just because I could not be a doctor and now I need to be a pharmacist. MBA, 𝗵𝗱 changed the perspective on what kind of value this can bring. And if I have to talk to you about my first deja vu or my first eureka moment from a pharmaceutical sciences perspective, this was when I joined a company called as WNS and I started my career into analytics with them. And what I realized was, we worked on a project and our business stakeholder then helped us understand on how the analysis that we conducted would be utilized. And that was the moment when I realized that the numbers, the dashboards that I had put together, alongside with my team, that is not just a simple dashboard. That was a decision-making tool for NHS in UK to award market access to a drug which was not accessible to the breast cancer patients. And what happened, I think serendipitously with me was that 4 or 5 months after submission of that project, my paternal aunt, she got diagnosed. She was in UK with breast cancer, HER2 negative, and that was the moment when I realized that whatever I am doing or I will be doing in the space of healthcare and life sciences is actually going to go and impact a patient on the other side.
Wonderful.
That patient could be someone I don't know. That patient could be someone, from my family or my friends. So that kind of is the journey, if I have to talk about very early on, what I took on how did I end up in healthcare and life sciences.
That become a purpose for you.
Yeah.
That you subconsciously realize that while you want to work and you build your career in this industry, but all the good things that you would do here would actually positively transform people's lives.
Absolutely.
Is that what you're trying to?
Absolutely. I think, see, the way I have developed myself in the career, at the end of the day, we all need jobs, right? At the end of the day, we all look out for growth in our compensation, titles, designations, promotions, and so on. But without getting, you know, without sounding too passionate about it, I would say for me, it was the end purpose of making a difference in someone's life and making sure that that person who is in the need of a drug or medication that reaches out to him, whatever small part I had opportunities of moving outside of healthcare during the career, but I chose not to because, as you said, because of this purpose and this passion.
Looking at healthcare and double tapping on that, what makes this industry unique from a leadership standpoint as compared to some of the other industries?
So, if I have to say, healthcare is a combination of science, compassion, regulations, and commerce. That's where business comes in. Uh, Unlike other industries, wherein regulation in some cases may not be there, in some other cases, science may not be there. I believe compassion is a common thread across industries, across different facets of leadership. But because of these four different elements coming together, the leadership in healthcare has to be very empathetic, and I am very purposely and very very consciously using that term. Often we say empathy is a soft leadership skill. For me, I believe empathy is a very rigorous leadership skill, and it is rigorous because until and unless you understand why your team member stood up, woke up in the night, what is a patient experiencing out on the other side of the tool, until and unless you put yourself into the shoes of your patient, of your customer, you would not realize what is the difference that you make. So I think the empathy piece of it, the cross section, the intersection of science, compassion, um, business and regulation is something which makes it very very different from any other industry.
Your response has a lot of commonalities from what I've experienced having guests from your industry in past and having had the privilege to sit down with some of the best doctors in the world. I think one thing that everybody has consistently said, and so have you, is the empathy angle. So you are in the industry. Industry means business, but
Yep.
you're also in an industry where you also have to look at the empathy side of things. You also have to look at how this is going to positively or negatively impact human lives.
Sure.
Is this something that is ingrained in you as you walk through the corridors of your industry, or is this something that comes through formal induction? How does this happen as a matter of fact that whoever I speak with in your industry and renowned faces in around medical practice, everybody has this one common response, which is we take our job very seriously because there are human lives involved. There is an empathy angle, and we want to make sure that we do this for human beings around us.
I think the answer lied in your question itself, Sunny. At the end of the day, anything and everything that we do, there's a human life associated to it. In some of the other industries, if you commit, if you make a mistake, you have a next quarter, potentially to resolve that. In our industry, the flexibility to resolve an issue is very less,
Yep.
because one single algorithm, one single decision could lead to misdiagnosis, could lead to wrong dosage for a patient, could lead to clinical trial delays, could lead to patient safety issues. So at the end of the day, where this empathy piece comes in from is the realization that at whatever we are doing, there's a human life, there's a patient, and it's not just the patient, it's also the caregivers, the family of the patient that gets impacted. So I think the sheer realization of that one aspect, that you are impacting, touching a human life, is where the empathy piece comes in from.
But despite of this, you still have a P&L to own. You
Hmm.
still have businesses to run. You still have key decisions. You still have KRS and KPIs. How do you balance this right?
So, see, I would want to differentiate between empathy and sympathy out here, right? Now, the the sheer definition of empathy is that we just need to put ourselves into the shoes of someone else and then make those decisions. Now, obviously, while we are running P&Ls, there are difficult decisions that one needs to make, and that balance has to come in terms of what is good for the business, but at the same point in time, what is good for the customers whom we are working for, and for the employees who are working for us or whom we are working with, right? So that balance somehow comes in the form that we the decision making actually becomes easier when you practice empathy. It does not become difficult, and those difficult decisions become easier when you at the end of the day look at what is the potential outcome of the decisions that you're making.
There will be a lot of aspiring individuals who would like to build their careers in healthcare. If you were to be the ambassador of your industry and guide them why they should be joining this industry, would you like to say a few things for that?
Yeah, I mean, as we discussed, Sunny, first and foremost, it's the pleasure that you get, whether you're writing a code, or you're undertaking a forecasting analytics project, or you're into medical writing side of the things, or pharmacovigilance. No matter which facet of life sciences or healthcare you are in, the pleasure that you get when you think at the end of the day that today you have touched someone's life. And the other thing is, whatever you're doing in the healthcare or life sciences industry, that's going to outgrow you, because you may be building a framework for a drug today which is going to continue treating patients for 15 years, in the coming times.
Yeah.
So that sheer pleasure is something. So I would say, people who are currently making choices around their career, healthcare life science is a good space to be in if you want to get into something which is purpose driven. This is not a space where you would only shine and outgrow yourself when you're looking at compensation growth or positions growth. But more importantly, at the end of the day, if you want that satisfaction, which we cliched use very clichédly, job satisfaction, job purpose, that's something that healthcare and life sciences is bound to give you.
I cannot miss this opportunity of talking about AI in healthcare. And I want to talk beyond the hype
Sure.
because it is the way you adopt to AI and embrace it in a normal workspace is very different than how it will impact in your industry. How do you think the adaptation of AI in your industry is fundamentally different?
See, most of the times when we answer this question, we talk about regulations. We talk about the fact that in our industry, particularly, the auditability, the explainability of AI is extremely important. Again, it goes back to the same point that it will impact someone's life at some point in time. I think what we typically miss in this entire conversation of being a regulated industry is the aspect that life sciences industry is a highly interdependent industry. One algorithm in one particular function can impact the entire clinical trial spectrum, can impact the patient safety. So, those interdependencies are something that we typically tend to underestimate. I'm not saying regulations and regulatory framework is not important, absolutely important. Compliance is not an afterthought in our industry, compliance is by design.
Right.
But at the same point in time, that understanding, that appreciation towards interdependency that is there in healthcare and life sciences industry is utmost important, and that's also something that differentiates how AI, advanced emerging technologies are being adopted in healthcare and life sciences versus another industry.
Can you give me some practical examples of how AI is being implemented in your industry?
So let me talk to you about some near-term examples, Sunny. So AI is currently being utilized in healthcare or life sciences industry from patient stratification perspective when we talk about clinical development. From site identification perspective, again, from a clinical research standpoint, from real-world evidence generation standpoint. That's one side of the things. The other way of looking at it is from a AI assisted pharmacovigilance, which is signal detections from the safety data that we get. So that's the second way of looking at it. The third way of looking at it is the way the commercialization of pharmaceutical products is happening. Just to give you an example, if a medical representative is going and meeting with a physician, now in our industry, the other difference, going back to your earlier question, is the consumer and the customer are two different entities. So the consumer typically is the person who consumes the product, and customer who is making the decision. If we talk about retail, if we talk about CPG, automotive, typically consumer and customer is the single individual. Out here, the customer is the doctor and the consumer is the patient.
Well said.
So, going back to my example, when a medical representative is meeting with the doctor, in earlier times, they would get very discrete, niche amount of data, to understand what a doctor preference is, what is the prescription behavior that he has. At this point in time, AI is facilitating omni-channel marketing. A lot of machine learning, data sciences, AI aspect is being utilized. So, and whatever I'm discussing with you, these are not moonshots. These are real-time examples of deployment. I've still not spoken about information management, from a clinical research standpoint. So quite a few use cases that we have seen, which have scaled, which have gone beyond proof of concepts, which have been productionized and deployed within the pharmaceutical, life sciences, and healthcare industry.
And on the flip side, any myth in terms of AI implementation in healthcare that you'd like to eradicate today?
From a healthcare perspective specifically, I would say, typically there is a myth that AI will eliminate human clinical judgment or human clinical decision making. Many a times I come across statements that there could be times when AI would replace the doctors. I don't think that is going to happen. If there are companies who are working on bringing in AI models which would replace human clinical judgment, they are working on wrong problems, I would say. Think of AI in a clinical setting like an intern. Someone who is very intelligent, someone who has patterns to look forward to, but they still need a senior consultant, a senior clinical person, or a leader to make that final decision. So, in my opinion, that's the biggest myth that I often come across, that AI is going to replace the doctors and medical fraternity. That's not going to happen, in my opinion.
I love the way you coined this. AI is a very intelligent intern.
Yeah.
To that respect, I mean, that could be a statement that we can make more generously across industries, not just limiting yourself to healthcare. But good perspective.
I mean, we talk about digital twins, right? So, yeah.
How should leaders think about innovation in a sector that has a direct impact? Like you said, I don't have another quarter to correct things if I go wrong. Uh, how does that lead to decision making for something as disruptive as AI?
See, from a healthcare and life sciences perspective, particularly, I don't see innovation as a disruption exercise.
Okay.
In my opinion, in this particular industry, and it could be true from some of the other industries as well, innovation is a trust building exercise. Now, often what happens is organizations are tremendously under the pressure of shareholders, stakeholders, regulators, customers, to innovate at speed. And I believe, while speed is good to have, but that should not be at the cost of trust and credibility that is being built. So just to extend this conversation a little bit around innovation, I believe anything which can be standardized should be done at speed.
Sure.
But wherever human judgment is irreplaceable, we need to give that aspect a deliberate time, for innovation to be implemented in that side. So, uh, short, I'll go back. Innovation for me is not disruption in this case. It's more around trust and credibility building exercise.
Wonderful. You're often known to use this phrase, and it also is beautifully encapsulating the banner image of your LinkedIn. You call yourself a salaried entrepreneur. Can you set the context of why you use this
Sure.
from a lenses of a leader in your space?
Sure. No, I mean, this was something that was first used for me by one of my mentors, and uh, he shared with me that he picked up this term from Mr. 𝗵𝗵𝗃𝗃, the ex-CMD of
Yep.
HDFC Bank. In my understanding, for me, the definition of salaried entrepreneur is when you own the business for someone else's P&L, right? For me, salaried entrepreneur is someone who does not need permission to innovate, someone who is not outsourcing accountability, right? Someone who is a corporate citizen, a person who is not measuring his or her performance by doing things what he's asked for. I think person who moves away from doing things to origination is someone who I would call as as a salaried entrepreneur. Whether I was building GCCs or I was building AI analytics practices, Sunny, uh, the approach that I have taken is that I was building business within a business. So that's the reason, I believe that this term was used for me. And I believe that has also helped me, sort of pivot my thought process on how I look at the business, wherein for me, seeking forgiveness is much more important than seeking permission, especially when we talk about innovation piece of it.
Wonderfully said. Now, since you are living these values, I want to know from your standpoint, especially there are a lot of leaders who must be looking at you today. If you were to create real sense of ownership in a business or a process within a business without being a founder, how does that work?
I'll use two terms for it. One, be a good corporate citizen.
Okay.
What it means is that you think of the organization, think of the stakeholders whom organization is working with and working for. In the spirit of doing so, you would invariably start investing yourself, in the objectives, goals, and the purpose of the organization. That's the first way of looking at it. The second way of looking at it, which I said earlier, was start gravitating towards origination. Find that gap between comfort of doing things the way they have been happening to what is there that is not happening but should be done. If that gap could be plugged, whether it is plugged through innovation, whether it's plugged through doing things differently, I think that gap needs to be plugged. And if someone is able to identify,
Right.
I think that entrepreneurial mindset would always start to creep in. And in this case, we can also use the term intrapreneurial, wherein you're
Yes.
taking things which are already existing and you're making them better. So it's not always doing new things. It could also be doing things in a newer ways. So I think that's how the mindset shift would be required.
You'll agree and you'd have realized this that a lot of talent people around us. And I have a very precise way of asking this question because I wanted to really extract that value from the way you respond to it. But in today's time, I think even talented people often confuse tasks and impact. Do you agree to that? And how can they look at things differently? You might be doing a lot of tasks, but are you really creating that impact?
Yeah.
You might not be doing a lot of activities, but you might be creating a solid impact. Why do you think most people fail at this and what can be learned from it?
This is a mistake that I made very early on in my career, Sunny. I learned it very hard way. Two things. You spoke about focusing on tasks rather than outcomes or the impact. I'll add another point of view there. Uh, I was also in very early part of my career. I also focused a lot on. I was confusing being busy is equal to creating value. I would be the most hardworking person in the room, long hours, always available, get things done. But it was one of my managers who was also my mentor at that point in time, who sat me down one fine day and he told me that, uh, you know, being busy is easy, but being, someone who is creating value is strategic. So coming back to your point in terms of task versus impact, we often mistake tasks, with that impact because we want to be busy. We want to show that we are busy.
Yep.
There's this visibility theater that kind of plays a role. A number of times, we want to be visible,
Hmm.
and we don't necessarily think about what kind of impact or value we are creating. Many a times we confuse the definition of value. For a lot of people, if they get things done for what they were asked to do, it's value creation. But I think for the right, if we think about it in the right way, the value is at the end of the day, what is the difference that you're making in the life of someone, whether that's as part of your organization, one of the stakeholders, shareholders, or your customer. you know are you changing the way that other person is living his life, consuming your products, or whatever value that you can deliver? So I think that change in thought process would be important when we talk about moving away from a task based orientation of thinking to a value based orientation of thinking.
Interesting. A lot of people who are trying to build their careers in your industry, if you were to guide them that over the next 5 years, what would be the relevant skills that they should acquire as
Yeah.
they enter into your industry and they march forward over the next 5 years? And what additional thing they need to do so that they just don't have the right skills, but they also gain a respectable domain expertise,
Yeah.
which then becomes irreplaceable to an extent.
Yeah.
Any thoughts around that people can learn from?
Absolutely. I think the three skills would be the depth of domain, as you said. The second would be data fluency. And the third would be ability to exercise human judgment. See, what is going to happen and what is happening already with all Gen AI, LLMs coming in, the general knowledge is being commoditized by AI. What is not being commoditized is the domain expertise. So imagine someone who understands healthcare, how the business grows, and is able to make decisions, using the data and that human judgment
Yeah.
in this, in the times of ambiguity. So those three skills are going to be the most important, the core skills. And then in the center of this lies that empathy piece that we spoke about, customer centricity aspect that we spoke about, corporate citizenship that we spoke about. But the core will always be around domain expertise, data fluency, and human judgment.
That's very interesting. If somebody wants to be relevant in a global arena in healthcare space, where should they start?
Uh, See, relevance can be defined in two ways. Relevance could be in terms of how I continue to upskill, reskill myself with the changing environment. So, when I started my career, at that point in time, analytics was not necessarily the term that we were using. As I grew in my career, we moved from analytics to advanced analytics to big data analytics to data sciences. Now we are talking about AI, right? How I have kept myself relevant is I never left my domain. So I continue to invest in terms of my domain building, but at the same point in time, also continued investing in terms of skill building. That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at relevance is also credibility. How do you create credibility around yourself?
Right.
And I believe that credibility is not created in the boardrooms. For that, you will have to participate in creating a thought leadership around yourself,
Sure.
around the topics. You will have to take visible position on some of the critical topics. Writing is a very important aspect of it. Sharing your own perspective is very important aspect of it. So that credibility eventually starts building based upon what you say, how you say, and what are you living in terms of what you're saying.
Now let's talk about leadership in your field, in your domain of expertise. You are in an industry where the stakes are always high and there is a lot of uncertainty. In that scenario, from a company standpoint, what kind of leader should they be looking at to run the show?
A couple of things, in my opinion. One, uh, someone. I can give a cliched answer around vision and stuff like that. But if I have to talk about something which I have experienced firsthand, for me, calmness is very important. You know, a leader needs to bring in the skill of being calm. Now, what I mean by calmness is that the person needs to understand what the situation is. See, when the stakes are high, there has to be fear. So I don't believe in fearless leadership, personally. Fear should be there. As we say, डरना ज़रूरी है, डर अच्छा है. And but what is more important is that in those kind of situations when the stakes are high, we don't panic. We don't create anxiety in the room, which kind of leads to chaos. So calmness is one aspect. The second aspect, which we often underestimate, is keeping things simple. I think in the corporate world and the life that we live in, jargons, making things complex is very easy. What is very difficult is how can we keep things simple? How can we explain what we are doing to a sixth grader? How can we go in a meeting with one of our customers and we are not only speaking English, but also speaking the language that they understand. We speak the language not of the tools that we are developing, but of the customer who will understand that. So that's the second aspect of it, which is the simplicity or keeping things simple. The third and the most important aspect, which is very close to me, is this entire aspect around respect and integrity. I can compromise on certain things, but there's no zero tolerance, non-negotiable around respect and integrity. And respect is not about you know thanking someone, saying sorry. Respect is about ensuring that we acknowledge someone else's presence, and integrity, as it says, doing things in the right way when no one is looking at you. So those are the three aspects that I would call out from a leadership standpoint.
And after all these years in this industry, what are the key lessons that you learned that you wish you had learned earlier so that we can learn from you now and accelerate in our journey?
um, Two, in fact. One, not all the battles are worth winning. You need to choose the battles that you would want to fight, and these choices should be made based upon strategy, not ego.
Right.
That's number one. The second, which I'm learning, is you can celebrate quietly. You don't have to announce everything. So those are the two things. If I have to go back 20 years, I would do differently. Choose my battles more wisely than what I did, and I don't have to announce everything, or whether it's my success or failure. So those are the two things.
And if your leadership had to be summarized or reduced to one core value that you would strongly stand for, no matter what would that be?
Humility. And when I say humility, again, I go back to the two other terms that I used, which I strongly believe in, which is respect and integrity. Humility is all about acknowledging someone else's presence. It's ensuring that you're not surrounding yourself by yourself. It's about not treating yourself as the most intelligent person in the room. Humility is also by being a continuous learner. No matter whom I'm meeting with, no matter whom I'm speaking with, there's always something that I learn from that person. So for me, humility is paramount.
And what gives you hope about the future of healthcare?
Oh, a lot of things actually, Sunny, and the kind of talent that we are getting. I spoke about the three things, right, in terms of the domain expertise, data fluency, and human judgment. I think because of the sheer exposure that the current generation has, owing to the different tools, the kind of ecosystem that we have, this generation is stepping into this field, number one, by choice,
Sure.
not by serendipity. Number two, they bring these three skills very discreetly into themselves. Number three, I think a lot of organizations are also focused on ensuring that the talent understands the purpose, why they are doing what they're doing, understanding the context. So, if I see from a healthcare and life sciences perspective, the kind of talent that we are getting, there was a time that, I used to make a statement that we have a lot of scientists, but we don't have data scientists. I would want to go back on that statement now because we have people who understand all the three things. So, around data fluency, human judgment, and domain expertise. So I think the future of healthcare and life sciences is in safe hands. And not to forget, we have AI, which is, as I said earlier, which is a good intern to have alongside. So the talent, the human talent, is focused on more value added things, but while some of the standardized things would be taken care of by the technology.
Wonderful. What legacy would you like to leave behind from your work for the industry?
Personally, I'm not a big fan of the term legacy, and the reason I say that is because I believe every generation uh, they need to create something instead of depending upon something which has already been created, because our times are so dynamic, things become obsolete very quickly. However, if I have to answer the question in a way that if I have to be remembered for something, it would be, whether it's the frameworks that I create, whether it's the GCCs that I've created, whether it's the leaders that I have developed, at the end of the day, anything and everything that I have done or I will be doing, if that can compress the learning curve for someone even by an iota, I think I've done my job well. So for me, whatever I'm leaving, if that is helping someone grow without reinventing the wheel, without making the same mistakes that I have made, uh, that's I would call as legacy for myself.
Very well said. And I really appreciate your thoughts on those lines. With that being said, we move to a segment of our episode which I call as rapid fire.
Okay.
So I'm going to literally throw questions at you, and I expect not more than one line answer.
Okay.
Are you geared up for it?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So, one word that defines great leadership as well.
Clarity.
Clarity, and why so?
Uh, as long as the person is clear in terms of what is to be achieved, how it is to be achieved, who will be achieving it, that brings in vision, starts with that, vision ends with that. That brings in the element of humility, respect, and integrity as well. So I think clarity of thought with a leader is very, very important.
Fantastic. One capability healthcare leaders will need more effort in the future.
Um, Adaptive judgment, because uh, the times are changing, there's a lot of ambiguity. Making judgments, making decisions is not easy, and continuously adapting to changing times and making sure that the decision making process of a leader is also changing is going to be very, very important. So adaptive judgment would be important.
One habit that has helped you build your career.
um, Writing. So I write a lot. I used to write in private, and I think how it has helped me is it helps me validate what I'm thinking and what I believe, instead of me thinking whether I'm believing whatever I'm believing is the right thing to be done. So when I write these days, when I share it, not that I'm seeking validation, but it helps me understand that I'm believing in the right thing. So writing is helping me a lot, whether that's my Chakravyuh series, the Navras poems that I'm writing on the leadership, and it also helps me broaden my thought process. So writing is one habit.
And one mistake, as per you, that every young professional should avoid.
Uh, don't fall into the trap of deserving before desiring.
Very well said.
Yeah.
Very well said.
So yeah.
One belief you hold strongly about the future of healthcare.
Healthcare, life sciences, in the industry is the industry to look forward to, and I'm not saying it by virtue of dollar values and things like that. At the end of the day, for me, the appreciation towards human life is increasing, and because of that increase in appreciation, there's growth bound to happen in this space. AI is a great tool, a technology that is helping healthcare. It is opening up new dimensions. So that entire combination of human judgment and technology driven growth levers is something which keeps me very, very hopeful for the future of this industry.
Well, so, Divesh, this brings us to the end of today's episode. I would like to conclude it by saying that in any industry, I mean, healthcare and life has been no different. People come, people go. What is important is the impact that they create in their journey, the role models that they become by doing the right things. I think that is what continues to stay for generations. You are by no means done. You're still in the middle of your career. But I think what I know, and thanks to me knowing you personally, I feel you are one such leader. I would still want to say in the making, who is doing all the right things and is going to leave a very long lasting impact to the industry as a whole. And I'm sure in your response to the question I asked about what's that legacy that you want to leave behind, I'm sure you can add this to it, that you are a righteous leader. And that is, I believe, a true differentiator that you carry with which many others are aspiring to have. And that comes in naturally to you. And that makes you a wonderful leader for an industry that's not just for business, but for humanity. So, with that being said, I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
And may you have all continued success in everything that you venture into. And you have a personal fan in me. I like the way you think, I like the way you operate. Needless to say, I'm a fan of your knowledge and expertise, especially in your field. And I'm sure as you evolve and as you go forward, you're going to add more and more value to the humanity in general. So thank you so much for being on my
Thank
show.
you so much,
It has
sir.
been my pleasure having you.
Thank you so much for having me here. Great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Divesh. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Please press the subscribe now button if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, so that I can continue to bring such meaningful conversations on your screen. Until then, this is me signing off. Take care. Bye.